This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com and use the discount code MacVoices. Welcome to Mac Notables on MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, our resident bird lover, Mr. Ted Landau. Ted, it's great to see you. How are you?
Bird lover?
Well, Angry Birds, Flappy Bird.
Angry Birds.
Angry Birds.
I wouldn't say exactly a lover anymore. I've gotten pretty annoyed with Angry Birds in recent months. So.
Oh, any particular reason? I'm not familiar with any Angry Birds issues.
Just their whole approach. The game itself, when I actually get to play it, is not any worse. In fact, in some ways is better, but I've just gotten so tired of all the marketing, advertising gimmicks that now get built into the game, and really two big things. One is they now add all this, as many other games do, they now add all this in-app purchasing type stuff, which, aside from the whole issue of whether I want to get into paying extra, when a game gets to the point where I have to start making the in-app purchases in order to have a competitive score or in some sense, quote-unquote, win the game, I do get a little annoyed with that because I think that that's not fair. If you can't win the game without the in-app purchases, then they should just charge extra for the game and be done with it. But in any case, be that as it may, the other thing is, I also think it detracts if you get into comparing scores, which I was. I'm not into it much anymore, but I was. If you get into comparing scores, it also makes the whole thing messier because then how do you compare a score that somebody got with making in-app purchases versus a score that somebody else might have gotten that's just as good that didn't require in-app purchases and so in some sense might be considered to be superior, and all that sort of stuff. So it just makes the whole business of competitive scoring worse. Not to mention that Angry Birds people, Rovio, seem to have given up on using Game Center for a means of comparing scores because it doesn't work for their latest levels. It just doesn't even appear correctly at all. Not to mention that that the whole business of the cheating scores that were appearing on the Game Center list, which Apple said could be fixed in iOS 7.0, they made a mention of that. WWDC has not been addressed at all. And if you go to some of the Angry Birds games, like the top 100 scores are all phony. I mean, it's just gotten ridiculous. And so aside from all of that, then there's this whole issue of their advertisements appearing all the time. Every time I pause the game, an advertisement for another one of their games pops up. And not only that, what would really start getting on my nerves is that the advertisement for the game usually takes up almost the entire screen in a lot of these instances, and sometimes, and I'm often playing pretty fast. When sometimes like the game ends, and so it goes to the previous screen, and then I press to play again, and there's some finger tapping to do, and when you're doing it very fast, it becomes very easy to mistakenly tap the advertisement instead of what you intended to tap, and then what happens is it takes you to mobile Safari. To the iTunes, to the page in mobile or the iTunes store. Actually, I think it takes you to the App Store app. It takes you to the App Store app where you are offered a chance to buy the app, and so then I have to go back to the game. And after this happens, when I'm playing a game for a half hour, and when this has happened 4 or 5 times, and I'm getting and then it pesters me if I play a level 5 times and I don't succeed. Often, sometimes even on purpose, I'm not succeeding because I'm experimenting with some technique to try. Every 5 or 6 times it seems that I play the game and don't succeed, a little message pops up that says, do you want to do an in-app purchase to get help because you're stuck? Even though I'm not stuck, and I don't want the help even if I thought I was stuck. And so then I have to dismiss that. And once in a while I've accidentally made an in-app purchase that I didn't intend to make. No, that's not true. I did something. I used one of my... It's not worth going into, but I did something else I didn't intend to do. And by the time I get through all of that, what I've just said, it's a pretty negative experience. I just want to play the game and have it be simple without all this other stuff getting in the way. So that's what's been bugging me about Angry Birds.
It's really interesting to watch developers, and not just software, but on TV shows and everywhere else, they get a hit, and then they burn it out. They don't try to maintain it. They don't try to leverage it in a positive fashion. They just do everything they can, from T-shirts to calendars to mugs, every kind of merchandising. In this case, every kind, it sounds like, of every kind of in-app purchasing and advertising you can think of. And they end up killing it. Now, I don't know if Angry Birds is dead by any means, but I'm sure
they're still making a lot of money with that. In fact, there's a thing, I haven't tried it yet now that you mention that. There's a thing in the Angry Birds Star Wars game. There was this weird little circle on the Angry Birds Star Wars screen, and I tapped it, and I haven't looked into this much, but I tapped it, and apparently you can buy an Angry Birds toy. You can go to like Toys R Us or Target or whatever and buy an Angry Birds toy, and if you place this toy onto the iPad screen, as I understood it in my brief look, and I could be getting something wrong here, it actually activates something where you can now use this character in your Angry Birds game or something like that. I don't know. There's some interaction going on, which I could care less about, so I didn't pay any attention. Some interaction going on between an actual retail toy you can buy and the game. So it's another way to sort of I guess the idea is to sort of encourage you to go out and buy this toy, because now it can help you with the game, as opposed to just being a toy that stands alone. Or conversely, you can see you can think, well, in order to do better to the game, I have to go out and buy this toy. And I found that annoying too. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, there is an approach. I mean, the Charles Schulz estate, whatever, did it with Peanuts. You can find Snoopy on everything from greeting cards to toilet paper, I think. It doesn't seem to have hurt their monetary bottom line. I don't think they regret it. But then there's the whole other approach of somebody like Calvin and Hobbes, who basically said no marketing, no merchandising whatsoever. And I like that approach better, but I'm not the one raking in the money. So,
the Peanuts example is a great example. I feel like that's done with relative taste. I don't know why that doesn't burn out. Maybe because they've stretched it out. They haven't tried to hit it with everything. I'm not a reality TV person, but God, this holiday, it seemed like everything was the duck people thing. Just everywhere you went, you couldn't find anything that wasn't branded with them. And I understand the mentality of, okay, you got to strike while the iron's hot, make the money while you can. But I also wonder, with something that seemed to have, at least at first, the staying power of Angry Birds and the opportunity for longevity, that they've kind of sold out to the quick thing and are killing it.
Well, I can't say that they're killing it. If they're making more money, then from their perspective, I guess they're not killing it. But in terms of goodwill of the people who are playing the game, they've certainly, if I'm any indication, they've certainly lost a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, and I can't believe that you're alone. Because from what you said, it sounds like it's detracting from the game experience.
Oh, it does, definitely.
Well, and by the way, I love it when I can stump you with the introduction. But what are your thoughts on the whole Flappy Bird thing? First of all, did you download it and play it?
Yeah, I did, and I quickly gave up on it. I was terrible. I don't know. Apparently, I'm not alone here either. There's a certain segment of the population that's pretty terrible. I tried it for about a half hour and couldn't get past a high score of 2. Which is pretty bad. And I think once I got 3 or something like that. It might have been my high score. And I looked at it, and I played games like this before. Basically the running games where you just keep moving from scrolling left to right, and you have to avoid obstacles. And I played a number of them where I get to be pretty good. This one was taking me nowhere, and basically, my feeling was I had better things to do with my time. I don't need to try to be good at this game. I have lots of other things I can do with my time and try to see if I can improve on a score of 2. I wasn't having any fun. The whole point of the game is to have fun, and I was just getting frustrated. So I said, forget it. I don't need to play this game. That was the end of my experience with it.
Given, though, that you are a gamer to one degree or another, What was the big appeal here, and why did it seem to strike such a huge chord with so many people when, apparently it was white hot as far as, actually being purchased, but then there were people threatening the guy with bodily harm when he said he was taking it down, which didn't make any sense.
Well, I think I'm trying to say is I have no idea. why those people are saying that. There is, I mean, I do understand in principle the addictive quality of certain games. There are games. It's sort of like the carnival, you know, where they say, you know, throw this ball, and if you can knock over all 3 milk bottles, you win a prize. And of course, they're often rigged, so you can never knock them over. But nonetheless, you throw it and you knock over 2 of the bottles, and you say, oh, you know, I see what I did wrong now. If I just do it a little bit this way, I'll knock over all 3. And here's another $1. I'm going to try again. A lot of games are like that, where you play and you get a score of whatever, 150, and you just say, oh, shoot, you know, I should never have gotten my bird killed like that. I can do better. And so you keep trying to do a little better because you keep thinking that it's easy to do better, you know, and before you know it, you look at the clock and you spent the last 5 hours trying to do a little better, and you wonder where the time went, and then you start thinking that maybe you're addicted to this game. And I'm sure for people who can get past the score of 3, which I was never able to do, maybe that happens. It certainly happened to me with Angry Birds when I was playing it. I just enjoyed even not only the issue of just getting better, but I just enjoyed the puzzles. And when I solved one puzzle, I was ready to solve another puzzle, and you know, so I do get that, and I'm sure that's what happened with Flappy Bird. But why people would send death threats? There is no explanation for why people would send death threats other than that people are crazy. I mean, there's no good reason. It's not like I'm going to come up with, oh, here's a logical reason why you would send a death threat to somebody. Yeah, no, there is none. What can I say?
Okay, well, you make me feel a little better, because I looked at this. These kind of things fascinate me. It goes beyond a meme. It just turns into a firestorm that rages across, you know, the internet and social media, and people taking such extreme stances on it. And it's a game. I mean, the graphics were okay, and I'm not taking anything away from the game, so please, folks, no death threats. But you know, it didn't strike me as one of those just gorgeous games that you would want to dig in and spend your life in. It just was something that, you know, maybe somebody might play while standing in line at the grocery store, but apparently not. Yeah,
I didn't see any a big characteristic of the game that wasn't true for half a dozen other games that I played and that I thought were better. Yeah, it certainly, if I hadn't read about it, I certainly wouldn't think there was anything special about the game. And to me, the much more interesting questions are not so much about the death threats as to what exactly was going on that led him to withdraw the game. And he's never, as far as I know, unless something came up in the last few hours, he's never actually been clear about that. And there's all sorts of speculation. You know, did Nintendo threaten him with a lawsuit because the pipe design was similar to Mario Brothers? And Nintendo apparently has said that's not the case. Was he just getting upset by the death threats and all the attention, and just, you know, psychologically too stressful, or what exactly? I mean, was he really? You know, at one point there was a claim I read that he was making $50,000 a day in advertising. You know, was he really turning down $50,000 a day because of a couple of death threats? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I would have been willing to do that. I think I could stand the idea that someone on the internet doesn't like me and probably isn't going to really carry out their death threat anyway, while I continue to make $50,000 a day. Or maybe he really wasn't making that much money, and maybe that's a false claim. You know? So there's just a lot of mystery involved as to exactly why he withdrew the game and what was going on, and I don't know if we'll ever know that for sure. So.
And I did not download the game. I don't know. But since you did, was there advertising in the game?
I have no idea. I never got far enough to get the advertising. I don't think I was such a loser that they don't even bother with advertising for this loser. So.
Maybe that was when I got to the end. Maybe that was the reward is advertising. Who knows?
Apparently there was advertising because that's what I read. But I gave up on the game before I ever saw an advertisement. So.
Yeah. Well, another mystery that we're going to have to solve at some point, or maybe it'll solve itself, or maybe nobody will care enough in a week. But right now, boy, it's hot. Sort of along those same lines, the social media and the firestorm part. I don't know if you've been following closely Chris Breen's most recent travails. And Chris, of course, is a friend of both of ours. He's on the show regularly. Chris, folks, for those of you who don't know, I'll have a link in the show notes to an article on Chris's blog that kind of takes you through it. But the short version is that he had written an article for Macworld. It was plagiarized by another writer on another site. It appears to have been mangled pretty bad. They even took his screenshots. He documents all this in the blog entry very carefully as to how he found it, how he challenged it, how he looked things up in the cached version of the site on Google. And again, what was interesting is he posted a couple tweets about it, and it certainly wasn't the Flappy Bird firestorm. But a lot of friends, supporters, and people started doing additional investigation into this person and brought up more contradictory things. And as of this recording, the only response back is that no, they didn't do it, and Chris is a hater, and Chris is slandering them and all this, and it's kind of amazing, but. It strikes me that, first of all, social media has really changed this. And I want to ask you about your experiences with plagiarism, Ted, but also how you addressed it then and how you would address it now. Because now you can post it out there, and there are a lot of fact checkers that are going to do it almost for you, just because that's what they want to do. Have you ever had anything plagiarized to any significant extent?
A little bit, not much really, as far as I know. I'm surprised. I didn't know a lot about it. We talked about it a little bit before the podcast started, and I hadn't been following it. And I'm kind of surprised because usually when the plagiarism occurs, it's so blatant, and it sounded like it's pretty blatant in this case, that the person who did it makes no attempt to say it wasn't plagiarism. It's like. It's like you start off a speech 7 years ago, or fourscore, whatever it was, and you say, "No, I never read the Gettysburg Address. That just came to me last night." It's useless to try to say something like that when you're so obviously copying something else. So I'm surprised that they even went that route, but I guess that's what some people will do. The plagiarism that I had. Relatively minor, like I said. I mean, once in a while, I would find out that an article I had written, say for Macworld, or when I was doing MacFixit on MacFixit, would appear on someone else's site intact with my name. It wasn't like they were trying to take credit for it. And sometimes, especially with Macworld, I would find out that this was okay. That there was some sort of mutual agreement between the two sites, and they could repurpose the Macworld material, and somehow Macworld did okay by doing that or something like that. And so it really wasn't plagiarism. Sometimes that wasn't the case, and it really was some form of plagiarism, whether my name was attached to it or not. Even though my name is attached to it, if they get a lot of people listening to this should understand that a lot of how sites make money is by traffic. It's I, as an author, maybe want credit for it and would be satisfied that my name is there, but Macworld or MacFixit, when it was paying advertisers, wants to get the click-throughs. If another site is getting a lot of attention for an article that you wrote instead of your site, then they're getting the money for your work, in essence. So even though you might be getting the credit, it's not the critical factor in some cases. And there were some cases of plagiarism like that, but often, the general feeling was it wasn't worth the bother. Because there was no way to contact these people often back then, and they weren't getting that much traffic. They would be getting one minuscule, as far as anybody could tell, people who wanted to read my article would go to MacFixit or Macworld, like I said, and read it. And the number of people who somehow got confused and wound up on I'mAWeirdMac.com was relatively nobody. But it does get into an issue that did come up a lot in the early days of when I was doing MacFixit, which in some sense I think is still relevant today. And I agree with you, by the way, that these days it's so much more open that it seems harder and harder for people to get away with plagiarizing something. I'm not even sure why people would bother at this point in any sort of blatant way, like Chris is suggesting happened. When I was first doing MacFixit, there was a smaller bunch of websites: Macintosh, Mac Central, Mac Resource Page, a few others, and we were competing. In some sense, we were all very friendly, but we were also competing, and a lot of what we posted on our site, not a lot, but there's certainly a significant portion of what we posted on our site might be references to smaller sites. You know, like somebody might post something like, well, if you go to this website that nobody ever heard of, there's a great article explaining why Apple's blah, blah, blah works this way, whatever. And then later in the day, you know, one site would post that. And later in the day, somebody else would post a similar thing. You know, well, there's this great website where it has an incredibly good analytic article on why Apple is doing something. And then the first person would say, "You stole that." And you'd say, "What do you mean I stole it?" He says, "Well, it was it was on my website first that I found that weird website and the article. And so if you're going to link to it, you should say you shouldn't link directly to the article, but you should say you should read this great article as referenced on Rick Ford's Macintosh page, and send people to Macintosh, and from Macintosh they can go to the article, and that way I'll get some of the clicks that I deserve because I was the one that found it first." But then, of course, then the counter argument was, well, who cares if you found it first? I'm linking to the person who actually wrote the article. That's the important thing. Or alternatively, someone might claim, I didn't read it on Macintosh. I found it on my own. You know, prove otherwise. And so it got into this whole thing of whether linking to somebody else's website needed an attribution, and whether you could take ownership of the fact that you found it first, whether that had any meaning, as opposed to anything you might have written, which would be a whole separate issue. And I think some of that probably is still relevant today, and where when something happens, but no one seems to care about it as much anymore today. I think is also true because there are just so many more websites. You know, Apple, especially like Apple comes out with a new advertisement, and 100 websites within minutes are posting that there's a new advertisement on Apple's website, and nobody thinks to reference that they heard about the advertisement first on somebody else's website. That's never relevant. Though, and the other thing like that I will add, though I do find there are some websites, and I won't name them, that are annoying in that they don't seem to want you to leave their website to find an original source, where they'll say something like, so, you know, this article in the Wall Street Journal was very interesting, but then they make it hard for you to find the link to the Wall Street Journal article, and so you're stuck reading about it on their website instead. And that I don't like, but I wouldn't call that plagiarism. I just think that that's bad practice.
Yeah, and I think I know a couple of the websites you're talking about, and it is annoying because, and especially if it's a tech website, if it's a product or something that I want to learn about, or maybe even want to order, I don't want to have to go do Google search on it. I've just read the review, so I mean, even an affiliate link I find more than acceptable. I think that's very reasonable, and it's not intrusive. It takes me over to, let's say, Amazon, and I can order it, or I can at least find out more information about it. But yeah, it's really interesting, some of the tricks and I guess the thinking that goes into this. I had an experience with plagiarism, and this was before the rise of social media, where some material from my Mac user group site, the Mug Center, had been plagiarized, and I mean cut and paste plagiarized. All the typos were in there. If you looked at the source code, everything was right there. And I wrote to the guy and asked him, hey, look, you took it, take it down, and got no response. Went to his ISP, got no response. And at that point, is it worth legal action? Well, of course not. That's crazy, But it was just the idea that even if you went and did a Google search, he was coming up equal to my page. And it was a page that had involved a certain amount of research and some work. And in a way, I wish I'd had social media now, then, because then you can kind of, bring the fire and say, hey, guys, check this out, but, I know what it is. And it's so the world has changed, and we see so much of this going on in the education world, where students are under a lot of pressure, and they have to be aware that plagiarizing anything is not a good idea for so many reasons, not the least of which it's so easy to get caught now. So be warned.
Yeah, and speaking of the business with with the website, the Google, that was what I was thinking of in particular. Sometimes, like, I'll want to get a link to one of the articles I've written on Macworld because I want to include it in something else I'm writing, say. And so I don't remember the link, obviously, so I'll do a Google search. The article will come up. And one of the quirks of Google and Macworld is that often when I do that, I'll search like on the name of the article, as well as I remember it or something like that. And what will come up will be one of these affiliate links that Macworld claims is okay for them to do. A PC World will have a link to the same article or something like that. And that's not the link I want. I want the Macworld link, but the Macworld link sometimes isn't even on the first page. They'll have like half a dozen affiliate links on the Google page, and I have trouble finding the actual Macworld link. I have to refine the search and do some more precise copying of the exact title before the Macworld link comes up. And I've asked them about it, and I think the last time, it's been a while, maybe about a year ago, I think I asked them about this, and they said, yeah, there was some problem with getting Google to give the right priority to the Macworld link itself, and that they were working on it, but apparently they haven't still quite solved it because it still happens to me.
Yeah. And hey, listen, we're all trying to monetize our content to some degree because there are bills to pay, and people don't necessarily like lots of ads. I think they tolerate a certain amount because they understand it's necessary. You've just what we were saying about the Angry Birds thing. When it becomes intrusive and too much, it's too much. And, so I don't know. But from the plagiarism standpoint, folks, just, kids, everybody, just don't do it. It's not worth it. Come up with your own content.
Just say no. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, you know what? Spend the extra 10 minutes and write something of your own. And even in this case, even if it's in broken English, if you're intent on publishing in English and you don't speak it well, okay, go for it. At least it will be genuine. And that's all we can ask. And they won't get in any trouble, and you won't get the firestorm called down upon you. That sounded a little preachy. Sorry about that, folks.
I didn't say that.
Okay, thanks, Ted. Right under the bus there. Thanks, buddy. This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com and use the discount code MacVoices. This time around, I don't want to talk about Squarespace's ease of use, or templates, or e-commerce. I want to let you know about Squarespace's value, what it costs and what you get, and why it's such a great value. Squarespace has 3 packages: a personal, a professional, and a business. The personal plan, at $8 per month, is more than most people need, and features 200 pages, galleries, and blogs with 500 gigabytes of bandwidth, 2 terabytes of storage, and 2 contributors to the site. If you're into e-commerce, you can sell 1 product and accept donations. Upgrading to the professional package at $16 a month gets all that, plus the ability to sell up to 20 products, and a developer platform for when you want to experiment. The top-tier business plan gets you all of the above, plus lets you sell an unlimited number of products, gets real-time carrier shipping, label printing via ShipStation, and integrated accounting by Xero. Those prices are based on an annual plan, and they include a mobile website and store, a custom domain name, and Squarespace's award-winning customer support that often delivers answers to you within a few hours, or faster if you want to use the live chat option. What's more, you aren't just getting web hosting. You're getting Squarespace's amazing web software, but perhaps even better, their secret sauce that allocates more resources to your site when you need it. So no matter how much traffic hits your site, it won't go down. And whether you're running a business or just have a personal site, you don't want your site to go down. Ever. And don't forget that you can get another 10% off any plan with the code MacVoices. Squarespace is a deal to start with, and that makes it an even better deal. That's what I call value. Sure, you can find cheaper solutions out there, and they perform like cheaper solutions, and act like cheaper solutions. And who wants a solution that performs and acts like a cheaper solution? That's no solution at all, just a place for more problems and frustrations. And who needs more problems and frustrations? Who is Squarespace for? Squarespace is for you. Still not sure? Then get a 14-day free trial and experience the full power of Squarespace. Then get 10% off with the code MacVoices. Your best deal on the best website service out there. Squarespace. Everything you need to create an exceptional website. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. Another thing we had on the list is Apple's, I'm going to call it obsession with the Beatles. And I'm curious to see what you think. And folks, before you say email anything, I love the Beatles. It's great music. I think it's really interesting the relationship Apple has had with the Beatles throughout its history, and how much Steve Jobs seemed to really love their music. And now how the Beatles and Apple seem to have gotten together. And I'm not sure who's driving it. I don't know if it's the Beatles or Apple or both from a marketing perspective and an awareness perspective for the new generation. Ted, any thoughts on this, on the new Apple TV channel celebrating the Beatles' 50th anniversary in the States and all?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it obsession. Certainly, there's been a lot of attention paid to it in the United States in general. CBS had a whole 3-hour special on Sunday night covering it. The various news channels have been noting it all week. It's been in the newspapers. So, I mean, it's not as if Apple is alone in calling attention to it. And the Beatles are probably the most, actually, according to Entertainment Weekly, the Beatles are the #1 entertainers of all time. So there was a survey several years ago, and I believe they came out #1. So they're not trivial in the history of pop culture by any means. And it is interesting a couple of things in that regard. The Beatles are now 50 years old in terms of their music, and it's still quite current. Their music is still popular, it still sells. And when I was growing up in the 60s, music from 1910 wasn't exactly high on anybody's list of things to listen to. It's pretty impressive when you think about it, that music that's 50 years old is still relevant, and in many ways, I think maybe even more relevant than a lot of the more recent music in one sense, and that is that it crosses generations more. That music today, even not only generations, but groups within a generation, music today is much more fragmented. There are people who like, this alt rock, and then people who like this hip hop, and people who like this, and people who like that, and there's very little music that captures everybody's attention these days. Back in the time of the Beatles, except for the older folks that didn't like rock music at all, if you were into any sort of popular music, you at least knew about the Beatles and listened to their music and were familiar with it. And most people in my generation can probably sing the lyrics to almost every Beatles song across several albums. And I think that carries forward in a way that a lot of the current music doesn't. At the same time, I'm sure there's a lot of younger people that are into the various forms of music that's current today that could give a crap about the Beatles. But I still think that the Beatles span generations and years in a way that few other groups have done, and to some extent, the music in general from that period has that characteristic.
No, I agree. So if we take that as a given, and I think it is a given. I think it's a very fair assessment. Is it out of bounds for Apple to be leveraging that for their own benefit from the standpoint of selling new tracks and new things in the iTunes store?
No, not in my opinion. And why not? What would be wrong about it? Any more than any other form of promotion that they have for something to sell. They're always trying to get you to buy things on iTunes. And this is just another way. So. Okay. All right. Just checking. Your comments, though, I've wondered about this. Why is it that music doesn't seem to go stale as much as it used to? And with now our recorded culture, I mean, movies don't go stale, TV shows don't go stale. You see, I mean, there's all kind of things on Hulu. You can buy DVDs.
How is this changing our culture? Because I agree with you. 50-year-old music when any of us were growing up, come on. And now I'm not quite sure 50-year-old TV shows hold up. But on the other hand, Star Trek, there's some that still very well hold up as entertainment. Maybe not in quite the same way, but so it feels like certain parts of the culture are remaining relevant or at least influential longer. Yeah,
I would agree with that. There certainly was a transition in the 50s and 60s from everything that came before. We catapulted into a different mode. The 60s broke a lot of the rules of previous generations, and we're still feeling the effects of that. It's still rock and roll. Ultimately, bunch of people get on a stage with drums and electric guitars, and they're playing a different type of music than you would have heard 50 years ago, but you can still trace the line back to the 50s and 60s, especially the 60s, when electric music first really took off. So you can't do that. You can't draw a line from Elvis Presley back to 1910 as easily. So.
No, that's a really interesting point. That's a really interesting point. I don't know. The electrification thing, is that it? That we have better media to record it on now, or we've been able to capture it, or go back and digitize things and remaster them so they sound more relevant today?
I don't know. I was channel surfing the other day and hit PBS when they were playing Rolling Stones in a London concert that they had just done, I think, a year or so before. And they're getting up there, like 70 years old. I'm sure some of them, and they're still there. And they had a crowd that, at least from what the cameras were showing, the crowd were largely in their 20s. So it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and that goes to, I think, something about remaining relevant, no matter what you're doing and what area you're in. Maybe you're not going to be the top of the charts, but if you're still relevant and still out there doing your thing, and there are plenty of musicians, there are plenty of artists that are doing that, and they're very relevant to their fans. I think that's an ultimate goal for a lot of us. I don't know. Is for me.
I'll buy it.
Okay, good. So let's switch over to, and I'm just curious what this all means right now. We talk about Microsoft and Windows a lot of times, just kind of peering over the fence at what the other side's doing, and what it means. There was an article by Paul Thurrott recently that really criticized Windows in a big way. And I found it interesting, and again, we talked about this a little bit pre-show. I found it interesting that, at least from where I sit, it was almost in places a confessional that he had overlooked some things, or maybe defended some things in Windows that weren't right, and they've never gotten right. And now he's pretty critical of it. And we've seen some things in the Windows world recently that point to the fact that Windows 8 is not going well, and is not going to move forward well. Any thoughts from your perspective on this and what it means? And
well, first, not a lot. It would be my offhand. I rarely use Windows. I mean, I don't think I've booted Windows on a machine in the last year or so, and so I make no attempt to really stay current with all the nuances of what's going on with Windows 8. I've never used Windows 8, so I'm certainly not qualified to comment on how good or bad it is. I only know what I read about it, like the article that you cited. All that said, I mean, some of this recent criticism reminds me of the situation with Apple. Like a couple of years ago, Apple stock was breaking 700, couldn't do anything wrong. It was on top of the world. It was the biggest company in the universe, and so on and so on. And then suddenly it changed, and Apple stock dropped, and it seemed like every article that you read about Apple for the next 6 months to a year is Apple losing its mojo? Can't innovate anymore. With Steve Jobs gone, Apple is doomed, and on and on and on. It's just almost like piling on, almost. It's just like sharks smelling blood or something like that. And that cycle seems to have worked itself out now, and then you're actually seeing some positive stuff about Apple in the last few months. And I sense a little bit of that with Microsoft, where where it wasn't okay to be that critical of Microsoft. And now Windows 8 has been such a disaster, apparently, again, from what I've read, that suddenly that's an acceptable storyline. And people are now looking, how did Microsoft screw it up so much again? You know, first Vista was terrible. Now Windows 8 is a disaster, and their tablets aren't doing all that well. Their phones haven't ever done very well. Is this? No one is claiming that Microsoft is doomed by any means, but is this the end of Microsoft's dominance in any case? And the Thoreau article is another one in a succession of articles on that similar subject. And some of them I find more interesting than others. I think I mentioned to you, I found one that I read recently, I forget the author, who is commenting about a lot of Microsoft trouble from his perspective, aside from whatever might be wrong with Windows 8, was that they have failed to capitalize on their research ideas. That they have a research department that comes up with really neat ideas, according to him. He started off with an example of a contact lens that could be used to detect what your insulin levels were, and whether you need to, if you were diabetic, whether you needed to deal with it. Whether your sugar levels were, I guess I should say, not insulin levels. And it never became a product. The guy who was working on it subsequently quit and went to Google, and there's talk now that they might do something with it in conjunction with their whole Google Glass idea. It hasn't been brought to market yet, to be fair, but there was a sense in which Google, the shift seems to be that when you're looking for innovative products and inventive ideas, you turn to Google, not to Microsoft. And time again, Microsoft has failed to deliver on some research idea that they developed. And I think the article suggested that part of it is the culture. Part of it is the maturity of the company. The investors don't want to risk their investment on something that might not pan out at all, could be a complete waste, whereas the Google investors are much, maybe because they're conditioned to it because of the way Google has been structured, are much more willing to let Google go out on a limb with these things. And but whatever, the bottom line was, Microsoft now has a reputation for not being innovative, if they ever did have one for being innovative, and while they could get away with it more in the heyday of Windows, I guess, because it didn't matter, because Windows was so dominant in the whole computing world, that now with the shift towards mobile devices that Microsoft hasn't been very successful with, time to pay the piper, and their dominance is seriously being threatened.
It goes back to that whole thing of relevance. Will they remain relevant? Mm-hmm. And with the new CEO, who knows? I mean, Gates is still there, and that may be a great thing. It may be a horrible thing. We're just going to have to wait and see. Mm-hmm. But it's just interesting to see, just like so many people who were naysayers for the Mac for so long are coming around the other direction. And I don't think you have to be pro Mac to be anti Microsoft, or that you can't be pro both. Mm-hmm. Just for different uses. But when the staunch supporters start criticizing you, then it may be time to pay attention and do something different.
Oh, it's past time to pay attention, and I hope the new CEO will do something different for Microsoft's sake.
Yeah, because they have done a lot of great things. Mm-hmm. Innovation not among them. Mm. So again, we were talking pre-show. You just came back from a film festival, and I guess is it fair to say it's an independent film festival?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that they do have some studio films, but it's not called an independent film festival. It's called the Santa Barbara Film Festival, and it shows mostly independent films, some of which don't have a distributor yet and will never see a theater. Probably go direct to DVD or on-demand video. And some of which do have distributors or backing. It's a mix. But the festival really benefits from being close to L.A. Santa Barbara is only about 90 minutes away from L.A. In addition to the films that they show, they have every night an award that they give out. I'm sure they made up these awards just to make sure they had one for every night. But in any case, they have an award that they give out, and they get all the biggest names of the year to go and show up to get these awards, and then when they get the award, they sit down for like a 2-hour interview on stage, and people can buy tickets to see this. And they had, I forget all the ones they had, but they had Kate Blanchett this year because she's up for Blue Jasmine. They had Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese because of Wolf of Wall Street, and several others who I can't even recall right now. Oprah Winfrey was there one night. She was in The Servant, and so that she was relevant for that. And so they really get everybody, and so it's a fun combination of being able to see some of these big stars. And even if you don't go into the show, you can shop outside and stand along the red carpet and hope to get a glimpse of them or an autograph or whatever. And then you get to see all these great movies, where I'm much more interested in. I'm not a big fan of going to see the stars as much as I am in seeing the movies, and we wound up seeing about a dozen movies in the course of 5 or 6 days. So it was a lot of fun.
That's great. Anything tech relevant or Mac relevant or Apple relevant?
Well, aside from the fact that several films, as always, that had computers in them, you could see the Apple logo pretty clearly. Apple does a good job of winding their way into the movies in that sense. But there's only one movie that I saw that would be relevant to the tech world and the internet world in particular. And it was called "You Want Me to Kill Him?" With a question mark. And it reminded me a little bit of a film I saw last year called Disconnect, which was also about the dangers of the internet. And this was about the dangers of the internet also. I can't really tell you a lot about it without giving away some surprises that someone who intends to see it will be unhappy if I tell them. It is based on a true story, I will tell you that, and they tell you that right away. And it's a British film. And the start of the film is there's this guy who, high school, I believe, who is having an online romance with this woman, and she claims that she's being abused by her boyfriend, and she's also in a witness protection program for some other reason. A lot of strange things going on, and then it just goes from bad to worse. And the title of the film sort of gives it away. At one point, it suggested that he kill somebody, and he's seriously considering doing it. And what happens as a result is the story of the movie.
Interesting. So the internet, I guess, becomes the stage.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't based on a true story, I'd be dismissive of it, and I'd say, "Oh, come on, this could never happen." But apparently, it did happen. So, it is impressive.
Yeah. I think somebody wants to be fed, Ted.
That is, I'm sorry for the listeners. This is not my little kid who hasn't been fed in 2 days, and it's not a cat either that wants to be fed. It's a cat that walks around with her toys and makes these noises as if she thinks it's a prey that she's killed or something like that.
Oh, I see. little victory dance going on there.
It's a victory dance of sorts, yeah.
To wrap up, I wanted to do a follow-up to a discussion we had either last show or show before on All Sauce Disc Warrior. Mm-hmm. I know that you've had a couple things to say about it. I've just wanted to add that, once again, it saved a machine of a friend of mine when everything else had failed. Disc Warrior not only brought it back, but brought it back completely healthy and just humming along fine. So it really is kind of magic.
Yeah, it's an excellent program. I absolutely agree. And I'm writing up an article in which I mention your experience in this article. It's going to be in Macworld this Friday, and if all goes well. And the gist of the article is that I now know about 3 or 4 instances in the last few weeks where Disc Warrior was able to save the day when nothing else seemed to be able to do it. And what I found especially impressive about that is that there hasn't been a lot of, the developers haven't given it a lot of recent attention, it would seem. The current version of Disc Warrior was released in 2011, like 3 years ago. And it in itself is a .4 release of a base version that dates all the way back to 2006. So really, you're dealing with a version of the application that in some sense is like could be called 8 years old. And yet it still works its magic. I talked to them about it, and they claim that that's largely because Apple hasn't done a lot to change the way the critical structures that it works on are formatted. The volume formatting of hard drives for OS X is largely the same as it was 8-10 years ago. And so they haven't had a big need to do a lot of changes. And this word does take a different approach. You'll find that certainly you'll find that a lot of times when disk utility gives up on repairing it, that Disk Warrior will still be able to do it. And that's what we talked about last time, and that's what you're mentioning here. And in talking to the Alsoft people, they reminded me that if Disk Warrior isn't able to fix it, it doesn't mean you have to give up and reformat your drive, if that's even possible in some of these cases, or send it to drive savers or something like that necessarily. Give them a call, and they will go the extra mile to try to get you to get your drive recovered. They have some secret features in Disk Warrior that they will assist you with accessing if they think it's relevant. And they said they'll even, if you let them, they'll even use screen sharing to take over your computer and do some manipulations that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do yourself, that goes beyond the Disk Warrior application, that then will allow Disk Warrior to help, allow Disk Warrior to repair the drive where before it wouldn't. And in some cases, they said they've even asked the person to send the drive to them, and they work on it, all at no charge. Other than possibly the cost of shipping in that last case. That it's just part of what they do if you own the program. So it's really quite impressive.
Wow, I didn't know any of that, and that is good to know, to add that to your toolbox, because I would think that after you've run through all your disk utilities, and if you've run Disk Warrior and that's it, if you really need it, Drive Savers is your next option, or go to your backups and hope that everything that you need is there. So that's great news.
Yeah.
Interesting, and there are features built in there. I guess there's some things that can be really dangerous if they're not in the hands of the right people, and so they wouldn't give you access to it. But it's kind of amazing, because boy, there's that sick feeling when disk utility pops up and says can't fix this drive, and then you go through everything else, can't fix this. And then when Disk Warrior pops up and says, it's found these discrepancies, and would you like us to, rewrite the directory? And it does, and it all works. That's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. Of course, you hope, as we have said ad infinitum, that you have a backup as a last resort if Disk Warrior isn't going to help. But there are some cases where, even with a backup, I should add, there's some cases where even a backup isn't necessarily going to be directly helpful. I mean, backup will at least have your data saved. You don't have to worry about losing data. But in some cases, a drive is so screwed up that it won't mount in disk utility. And so you can't even reformat the drive, because you can't get the disk utility reformat command to work with it. And so so the simple act of erasing the drive and starting over and copying from your backup isn't even an option. And at that point, you might be thinking, well, I have to buy a new drive. But in some of those cases, Disk Warrior actually will be able to repair it. So don't give up without trying Disk Warrior, I guess, would be my recommendation.
Agreed. Yeah, it's something. Buy now, or if you wait until you need it, that can be a problem. The great thing about Disk Warrior too is it comes on a bootable CD or DVD. I'm not sure which one it is, so that assuming you have something that has a drive in it, still has a drive in it, or maybe I think you can also mount it on a thumb drive actually.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so it's one of those, put in your toolbox now for when you need it. Don't wait to get it. So. Well, Ted, I guess next time we get together, we should probably talk about Macworld, what you're doing at Macworld, and what all's going on. Because I think you've referenced a little news on that score in the past, and so we'll spend a little quality time talking about it.
Okay.
Great to see you. Behave yourself.
I'll try my best.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. He's Ted Landau. This is Mac Notables on Mac Voices. Check the show notes. Follow Ted on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Sign up for the newsletter. We like to stay in touch with you, and hopefully you'd like to stay in touch with us. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.